Picture this. You are lying in the ruins of what was once a machine shop on the western bank of the Volga River. The temperature outside is somewhere well below freezing. The concrete beneath you is dusted with frost, and the twisted steel beams overhead are draped with frost-rimed debris. You have been perfectly still for 4 hours. Your fingers are numb inside your gloves. Through the iron sights of your Mosin Nagant rifle, you can see a German officer somewhere on the far side of the rubble field, a distant figure in a gray coat, gesturing at a map, directing men, very much alive and completely aware that he is beyond your reach. You know your effective range, you know the limitations of your glass, and you know that somewhere out there is a German sniper with a Zeiss optic who can see you far more clearly than you can see him. That was the reality for Soviet snipers in Stalingrad by the autumn of 1942. Not a crisis of skill, not a crisis of courage, a crisis of glass, a crisis of centimeters of magnification, of lens coatings, of the cold, hard physics of light bending through precision-ground German optics versus Soviet ones that simply could not keep pace.
And the solution to that crisis would not come from any weapons bureau. It would not come from an engineer or a general or a procurement committee. It would come from a man whose only formal training was in bookkeeping. The city that could not fall. To understand what was happening in November 1942, you need to understand what Stalingrad meant, not just militarily, but existentially. The city sat on the western bank of the Volga River, roughly 900 kilometers southeast of Moscow. By the logic of Germany's summer 1942 campaign, known as Case Blue, capturing Stalingrad would accomplish two things simultaneously. It would sever the critical Soviet supply artery along the Volga River, which carried oil from the Caucasus north to fuel the entire Red Army's operations. And it would provide a secure anchor on the eastern flank of Germany's push deeper into the Caucasus oil fields themselves, fields that Hitler's war machine desperately needed to keep running. The city had another dimension too, one that neither side could entirely separate from the military calculus. It bore the name of Joseph Stalin. For Hitler, taking it was a psychological coup.
For Stalin, losing it was simply unthinkable. On July 28, 1942, Stalin had issued Order No. 227, the famous "not one step back" directive, threatening severe punishment for any unauthorized retreat. The message was not subtle. Stalingrad would be held. By August 1942, German forces had reached the city's outskirts. The Luftwaffe had bombed it so heavily that much of the city was already rubble before the ground fighting truly began. And here is the dark irony of Stalingrad, the thing that makes it so hauntingly unique as a battle. The rubble helped the defenders. Every collapsed building became a fortress. Every pile of broken concrete became a firing position. Every street became a kill zone in which a small, determined group of men with rifles could slow an entire company of attackers for hours or days. The Germans had a word for it: Rattenkrieg, rat war. Both sides crawled through the ruins of apartment blocks and factory halls, fighting for individual rooms, individual staircases, sometimes individual walls. Key positions changed hands multiple times in a single day.
Buildings earned their own grim histories: the grain elevator, the Red October factory, Pavlov's house, a ruined apartment building held by a small Soviet garrison for 58 days against repeated German assault, inflicting, according to Soviet accounts, more casualties than Germany suffered in the entire fall of France in 1940. Into this landscape, the sniper was not simply a weapon, he was a psychological instrument. Every German officer shot was a message. Every command post that had to be relocated deeper behind the lines was a small Soviet victory. Every German unit whose coordination broke down because its leadership had been picked off was a unit that attacked less effectively, that consumed Soviet lives at a slower rate. Soviet snipers during the battle came from an extraordinary range of backgrounds. Many were hunters from Siberia and the Ural Mountains, men and women raised in environments where patience, fieldcraft, and cold weather were simply facts of existence, not training objectives. By late 1942, the sniper school operating out of the Lazur chemical plant was producing new shooters at a desperate pace.
Vasili Zaitsev himself, who had arrived in Stalingrad in late September 1942 as a sailor turned infantryman, had killed 32 enemy soldiers with a standard rifle before being issued a scoped weapon. Once given a proper sniper rifle, he recorded 40 confirmed kills in his first 10 days. The Sniper Corps of the Soviet 62nd Army was, by any measure of human skill and determination, formidable. But something was wrong. The numbers told the story in brutal clarity. The optics gap, why Soviet snipers were losing. Here is the technical problem, and it matters enormously, so we are going to spend a moment on it properly. The standard Soviet sniper scope in use at Stalingrad in late 1942 was the PU, the Прицел Укороченный, or shortened sight. It was a 3.5 power, fixed magnification optic mounted on the Mosin-Nagant bolt-action rifle, chambered in the 7.62 by 54mm rimmed cartridge. The Soviet optical industry had been evacuated east to the Ural Mountains following Germany's invasion in June 1941, and the PU was chosen in large part because it was simpler and easier to mass-produce than its predecessor scopes. The glass was adequate, the mounting system was functional.
In the conditions for which it was primarily designed, engagements out to roughly 300 to 400 meters in relatively clear conditions, it performed reasonably well. But Stalingrad was not 300 meters. The rubble landscape created a paradox. On one hand, everything was close. You could sometimes touch your enemy through a wall. On the other hand, the factory districts and open ground between ruined buildings created lanes of fire that stretched to 500, 600, sometimes more than 700 meters. German officers had learned this quickly. They directed operations from the far edges of those lanes, moving in ways that kept them beyond the reliable, effective range of Soviet counter-sniper fire. The Germans, meanwhile, were fielding a variety of scopes that offered real advantages at those distances. The Zeiss Zielfir, the name translates roughly as foresighter, was a 4-power optic, but it was the quality of the glass, not merely the magnification number, that set it apart. German optical engineering in the 1930s and early 1940s was among the finest in the world. Carl Zeiss of Jena had spent decades perfecting lens coatings, glass clarity, and light transmission. A well-made German scope did not just offer slightly more magnification, it offered fundamentally superior image quality, brighter, crisper, with better contrast in low-light conditions, and with more precise, repeatable adjustment mechanisms. Some German snipers were also using 6-power scopes, the Zeiss Zielsex, which pushed engagement ranges even further. The practical effect of this gap was felt in kill ratios. Soviet snipers were dying faster than they were killing their German counterparts. An experienced German sniper operating from a well-prepared position could engage and eliminate a Soviet sniper attempting to approach with an effective PU scope range. The engagement envelope was asymmetric in Germany's favor, and in a war where every Soviet sniper loss also meant the loss of that sniper's accumulated skill and their ability to train others, the deficit compounded. The obvious solution, develop a better Soviet scope, was not actually available. The optical manufacturing facilities that had been evacuated to the Urals were already operating at absolute capacity, producing periscopes for tank crews, rangefinders for artillery, and binoculars for commanders. The idea of standing up a new precision optical development program in the middle of an industrial crisis, in the middle of the worst battle in human history, within an 18-month timeline, the official estimate from Moscow's Weapons Bureau, was not a solution. It was an admission of helplessness dressed up in bureaucratic language. Several Soviet snipers had tried improvised workarounds. Captured German rifles with their scopes still attached were valuable prizes, but the mounting systems were entirely incompatible with Soviet weapons. German scopes sat too high on their mounts, throwing off sightlines. Attempts to stack multiple PU scopes in series to increase effective magnification simply could not survive the recoil of the Mosin-Nagant's powerful cartridge. The improvised rigs fell apart after a handful of shots. The problem seemed to have no solution. Then someone thought about it differently. The snipers of Stalingrad, Zaitsev and the Hares. Vasili Zaitsev deserves proper introduction before we continue, because understanding him and his students is essential to understanding why the coming solution mattered so much. Zaitsev was born in 1915 in a village in the Ural Mountains. His grandfather was a hunter of the old Siberian school, a man who tracked wolves through deep snow,
who taught his grandson that patience was not merely a virtue, but a survival mechanism, and that a single well-placed shot was worth infinitely more than a volley of rushed ones. Zaitsev killed his first wolf with a single bullet at the age of 12. He had to carry the rifle behind his back because the gun was nearly as large as he was. He joined the Soviet Pacific Fleet in 1937 and was working as a bookkeeper in Vladivostok when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. He spent over a year fighting bureaucratic inertia to get transferred to a combat unit, and finally crossed the Volga into Stalingrad in the dark early hours of September 22, 1942, as part of the 284th Rifle Division of General Chukov's 62nd Army. Zaitsev did not start as a sniper. He arrived as an ordinary rifleman and fought in street-level combat for weeks. It was a regimental commander who spotted something unusual, watching Zaitsev drop enemy soldiers at distances most soldiers considered far beyond practical rifle range, and arranged for him to receive a scoped Mosin Nagant. Within 10 days of first using the weapon properly, Zaitsev had 40 confirmed kills. What made Zaitsev exceptional was not simply accuracy. He was a systematic thinker operating in a chaotic environment. He developed what he called the Sixes, teams of 3 pairs of soldiers, each pair consisting of a sniper and a scout, positioned to cover overlapping fields of fire over a wide area. The system allowed for constant observation, mutual protection, and coordinated targeting that kept the enemy perpetually uncertain about where the threat was coming from. When Soviet propaganda picked up his story and broadcasted it across the country, his surname, Zaitsev, meaning hare in Russian, became a small legend. His students became known as the Zaichata, the Little Hares. But by November 1942, the Little Hares were dying. The German response to the sniper threat had been systematic and effective. German counter-sniper teams, using their superior optics, had learned to locate and eliminate Soviet shooters before those shooters could close the range to engage effectively. Students trained by Zaitsev were being killed within days of completing their instruction. Zaitsev himself later wrote about the atmosphere at the sniper school during this period. The instructors teaching camouflage and patience and fieldcraft, while knowing, quietly, that those skills were not enough to overcome the fundamental equipment disadvantage their students faced. Tanya Chernova, a young woman who had crossed the front lines through the city's sewer system to reach Soviet lines and had subsequently joined the sniper school, was shot while trying to engage a German officer at a range her scope could not reliably cover. She survived, barely, but her time as a sniper was finished. She was 19 years old. The school kept producing shooters. The front kept consuming them. Something had to change. The accountant's idea. The figure at the center of what happened next is presented in the source text upon which this video is based as Nikolai Rukavishnikov, and here I need to be transparent with you.
The specific individual and the precise mechanics of what we are about to describe come from a narrative account, and while this type of battlefield improvisation is historically well documented as a practice across multiple theaters of the war, the individual name and some specific details are drawn from a story that combines verifiable history with narrative reconstruction. What is absolutely well documented is this: Soviet soldiers did capture German optical equipment and attempt improvised modifications. Soviet armorers at Stalingrad did work under extremely primitive conditions, and the fundamental problem of the optics gap was real, urgent, and solved partly through exactly the kind of unauthorized, improvised engineering this story describes. With that clearly stated, let us continue. Because whether the specific name is accurate or not, the type of man this story is about almost certainly existed, and the problem he solved was completely real.
A Soviet armorer working in a basement workshop beneath the chemical plant in November 1942 is examining a captured German scope, a Zeiss glass salvaged from a dead Wehrmacht sniper, recovered by a soldier who understood that intact German optics were valuable enough to carry back even under fire. The standard approach had been to try to mount the entire German scope onto a Soviet rifle. That failed every time. The mounts were incompatible, the geometry was wrong, the height was wrong. Every attempt ended in frustration. But this man was not a weapons engineer. He was someone who worked with numbers and fine tolerances, an accountant by training, a precision worker by instinct.
And he looked at the problem from a completely different angle. What if the goal was not to mount the German scope as a whole unit? What if the goal was to use only the German optical elements, the actual glass lenses, transplanted into a Soviet scope body that already had the correct mounting rail for a Mosin-Nagant? This was a radical idea, and every qualified optical engineer who heard it would have immediately listed reasons it could not work.
German and Soviet optical designs used different engineering philosophies, different lens coatings, different internal spacing calculations. The eye relief would be wrong. The image alignment would be wrong. The whole system would almost certainly produce a blurred, distorted image. And even if it worked, the recoil of the 7.62 by 54mm cartridge would shake the improvised spacers loose within a few dozen rounds. He began working anyway. He disassembled the German scope with painful care, documenting each step, extracting 4 precision ground glass elements coated with the proprietary anti-reflective treatment that gave Zeiss optics their famous clarity and light transmission. He gutted a Soviet PU scope body, removing the inferior Soviet lenses but keeping the tube and its integral mounting system. Then he began machining spacers from whatever materials were available, in one documented account from spent brass shell casings, creating tiny rings to hold the German lenses at precisely the distances from each other required to produce a functional image. The calculations were done by iteration, not by optical engineering formula. He pointed the assembled tube at a distant wall and checked the image. Too close, and it blurred. Too far, and the magnification was wrong. He adjusted. He tried again. He worked by candlelight in a freezing basement while the battle literally raged overhead. After multiple nights of work, something remarkable happened. The image resolved, crystal clear. Better magnification than either the Soviet or the German scope alone, approximately 5 power according to later accounts, with the superior light transmission of the Zeiss glass. The scope held 0 through sustained firing. The ceiling held against moisture. The Soviet PU scope body had turned out to be slightly narrower in diameter than the German optic, which meant the German lenses fit inside it with room to add adjustment spacers, a happy accident of incompatibility that actually made the whole hybrid design possible. Bureaucracy versus battlefield. When the armorer brought his creation to the sniper school's chief instructor, the response was not celebration, it was alarm. The instructor looked through the scope. He recognized immediately that the image was better than anything the Red Army was fielding at Stalingrad.
And then he told the man who had made it that he might have just gotten himself shot. Using enemy components in a modification to military equipment without authorization was explicitly prohibited under Soviet regulations. The NKVD, Stalin's political police, enforced those regulations with firing squads. Using German parts could be characterized as collaboration. It was, in the strictest bureaucratic sense, completely illegal. But the instructor did not confiscate the scope. He brought it to Vasili Zaitsev. Zaitsev, according to accounts of the meeting, looked through the scope for a long time without speaking. The clarity, the detail. He could see what standard Soviet optics could not show him. He asked one question: how many could be made? What followed was a bureaucratic battle layered on top of a military one. Producing any quantity of these hybrid scopes required authorization, resources, access to the factory's machine shop, and protection from the NKVD political officers who could and would shut down the entire program if they decided it violated regulations.
The armorer needed captured German scopes to cannibalize, and getting those required incentivizing soldiers at the front to recover intact enemy optics under fire, which meant offering something in return, most likely extra food rations. A meeting was convened that included not just the armorer and Zaitsev and the school's commander, but also visiting technical experts from the main artillery directorate in Moscow. Those experts were appalled. The lens spacing was mathematically wrong. The optical path length violated standard calculations. The eye relief was inconsistent. The brass spacers would deform under sustained firing stress. It was, in the technical experts' words, amateur work that could not survive field conditions. The exchange between the field commanders and the technical experts at that meeting captures something that recurs throughout military history with almost depressing regularity. The experts had a correct theoretical understanding of what a proper solution should look like. They also had an honest estimate of how long a proper solution would take to implement: 18 months to 2 years for a new scope to be designed, tested, and manufactured at scale.
The field commanders had a different time horizon. They were not thinking about 18 months. They were thinking about 18 days. When the commander asked the technical expert how many properly engineered improved scopes he could deliver to Stalingrad within the next month, the answer was none. And on the strength of that answer, authorization was given for a small production run of the hybrid scopes, 20 units initially, using captured German optics and whatever machine shop time could be scraped together. The technical expert's objections were noted. The meeting was closed. Results on the battlefield and what it all means. The hybrid scopes went first to the most experienced shooters at the school. Zaitsev received one of the first 5. He mounted it on his personal rifle and spent 2 days testing it from multiple positions across the barricadey factory district. His assessment was enthusiastic and precise. Target identification at up to 600 meters. Precise shot placement at ranges previously considered effectively beyond Soviet sniper capability. 0 maintained through 150 rounds of firing. He recommended immediate production of additional units. The tactical results were rapid. German officer casualties in the sectors where hybrid scope snipers were operating began to spike in late November and through December 1942. Officers who had previously moved with relative freedom behind their lines, directing mortar crews, consulting maps in the open, walking between positions, found themselves vulnerable at distances where they had previously felt safe. German command briefings shifted from field positions to reinforced bunkers. Officers began traveling with increased security. The comfortable margin of safety that had existed at 500 to 600 meters began to erode. This had cascading effects that are harder to quantify but no less real. When German artillery observers could not safely occupy forward positions to direct fire, German bombardments became less accurate. When German officers could not freely coordinate attacks from exposed positions, attacks became less well organized. When German counter-sniper teams found themselves matched at extended ranges by Soviet shooters whose optics could now compete, the systematic elimination of Soviet snipers slowed considerably.
By the end of December 1942, according to accounts of the period, over 30 hybrid scopes had been produced. The snipers using them had collectively eliminated more than 200 German soldiers, including roughly 40 confirmed officers and senior non-commissioned officers. The 40 German officers vanished headline of this story. The kill ratio between Soviet and German sniper units began to reverse. By February 2, 1943, the German 6th Army, over 90,000 surviving men, surrendered in the ruins of Stalingrad. It was the first surrender of an entire German field army in the war. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, who Hitler had promoted to that rank just days earlier, partly to pressure him not to surrender, became the first German field marshal ever taken captive. The battle that had begun in August 1942 was over. The armorer returned to his maintenance work and followed the Red Army westward through Ukraine, Poland, and eventually into Germany itself. He continued producing hybrid scopes whenever captured German optics were available, though never in large quantities, never with official recognition, and never with anything resembling proper credit from the weapons development establishment that had dismissed his work as amateur improvisation. Official Soviet records, when they addressed sniper performance at Stalingrad Amal, attributed the results to superior training and individual skill. The hybrid scope was quietly absorbed into footnotes, mentioned in veterans' memoirs and personal letters, absent from the official history. After the war, in a story that has the quality of something that actually happened precisely because it is so unspectacular, the armorer returned to the Ural Mountains and his old job. When a journalist found him years later and asked about his wartime service, his response was brief. He had fixed rifles. Many people had fixed rifles. Why was anyone asking him about it? But at a veterans reunion in Moscow in 1973, a group of former snipers, now old men, grandfathers, retired foresters, and factory workers, sought him out. One of them embraced him with tears running down his face.
"Because of you," that man said, "we came home. Because of you, we could kill them before they killed us. You gave us a chance." The lesson embedded in this story does not fit neatly into a single category. It is not purely a story about military innovation, though it is certainly that. It is not purely a story about the futility of bureaucracy in wartime, though it contains that too. It is, at its core, a story about the gap between proper and functional. The technical experts at that meeting in the Chemical Plant Administrative Building were not wrong. The hybrid scope was not properly engineered. The lens spacing was mathematically imprecise by the standards of formal optical engineering. The brass spacers were a workaround, not a solution.
In the world of peacetime development cycles and proper testing protocols, the experts' concerns were entirely legitimate. But in Stalingrad, in November 1942, with snipers dying at a rate that was outpacing the school's ability to replace them, proper was not the relevant standard. The relevant standard was functional, and it was available now. The armorer was not smarter than the engineers. He simply had nothing to lose.
He had a dead friend, a borrowed piece of glass, and no particular investment in the rules that said it could not be done. Military history is full of moments where the official solutions arrived too late and the unofficial ones arrived just in time. The improvised became standard, the illegal became essential, and the men who bent the rules to keep other men alive faded from the records, while the battle itself entered the history books. Stalingrad is remembered as the turning point of the war in Europe. Rightly so. Over 2 million men fought in and around that city, across 6 months of combat that was among the most brutal in recorded human history. The Sixth Army's surrender sent shockwaves through Germany's military and political establishment, from which it never fully recovered. The snipers were one piece of that enormous story. The hybrid scope was one piece of the sniper story, and the accountant from the Ural Mountains who made it was one quiet thread in the whole catastrophic fabric. Unrecognized, undecorated, and yet, in the words of the men who survived because of him, entirely necessary.
If you found this story compelling, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We cover the history that gets left out of the standard accounts, the stories that happened in the margins of the famous battles, where the war was won and lost in the small, unglamorous decisions of ordinary people. There is a lot more where this came from, and you will not want to miss it.